I never thought the road back home would feel like this. Empty, heavy, almost haunted. When Grandpa died, I promised myself I'd visit the farm one last time, scatter some of his ashes, maybe walk through the grape rows like I used to when I was a kid. That land wasn't just dirt to me, it was the only place that ever felt like ours. It was a bright afternoon, the kind that should have felt peaceful. The sky was the kind of blue that looked painted. The wind carried faint smells of pine and soil, and for a moment I could almost hear Grandpa's voice, gruff, patient, full of that dry humor he always had. "Land doesn't lie, boy," he'd say. People do. The asphalt gave way to the old gravel road that led to the farm. But as I turned the final bend, my chest went cold. The road wasn't gravel anymore. It was paved, perfect, black and shining like glass. And at the end of it stood a massive wrought-iron gate with gold leaves curling along the bars. Behind it, mansions. Dozens of them, each one lined up in perfect rows like plastic toys. Where my grandfather's barn once stood was now a stone fountain shooting water 10 feet into the air. The fields where grapes used to grow, gone, flattened, paved over by driveways and luxury mailboxes. A glossy sign beside the gate read, "The Vineyards at Lakehurst, a Whitmore luxury community." For a second, I thought maybe I was lost. Maybe the GPS had glitched. But when I checked the coordinates, they matched. This was Flint Farm. The gate guard stepped out from his booth wearing a gray uniform and mirrored sunglasses. His badge said, "Security." "Afternoon, sir," he said flatly. "Residents only." I stared past him trying to find even one piece of the old farm. An oak tree, a fence post, anything. But there was nothing left. "This was my family's property," I said. "My grandfather's name was Charles Flint. I own this land." The guard's lip twitched, almost a smile. "Yeah? You got paperwork for that?" I held up my phone, showing him the scanned copy of the deed. "Right here." He leaned closer, looked at it for 2 seconds, and smirked. "That's cute, but this development's been here for 2 years, pal. Maybe you're confused." Confused. My voice cracked. "My name is on the title." He tilted his head. "Then you can take it up with Mrs. Whitmore. She owns the place now." Whitmore. The name meant nothing to me yet, but it was about to. The guard gave me a slow, dismissive grin. "Yeah, Cassandra Whitmore. The boss lady. You'll know her when you see her. She doesn't blend in." He tapped his earpiece, said something I couldn't hear, and returned to his booth. I just stood there, staring through the gate at the place where my childhood used to live. I swear I could still feel the old barn. The smell of hay and motor oil, the creak of the door, the echo of Grandpa's boots on the floorboards. But all I saw now was marble, fountains, and fake perfection. A few minutes later, I heard the low growl of an engine behind me. When I turned, a black Range Rover was rolling up the driveway, sunlight glinting off its polished chrome. It stopped beside the guardhouse and the window lowered with a soft hum. That's when I saw her for the first time. Cassandra Whitmore. She stepped out like she was walking onto a runway. Tall, graceful, dressed in a white linen suit that somehow stayed spotless despite the dust. Her sunglasses hid half her face, but her smirk said everything. Confidence, control, and just a hint of mockery. "Is there a problem, Ray?" She asked the guard without looking at me. He pointed my way. "This gentleman says he owns the property." She turned, scanning me from boots to jacket. I could see her mind filing me away instantly. Poor, local, harmless. "Oh," she said, smiling like I'd just told her a joke. "How charming." "You must be mistaken, sweetheart. We purchased this land legally through Boulder County's abandoned property program." "It wasn't abandoned," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I've been paying taxes every year. I have the receipts." Her smile tightened like she'd bitten into something sour. "Well, perhaps your memory is mistaken." She reached into her bag and pulled out a card, holding it like it was contaminated. "If you'd like to discuss this further, our attorney, Mr. Keir, will be happy to explain why your claim doesn't hold up." "I don't need your lawyer," I said. "I need the truth." She tilted her head. "The truth," she said softly, "is that people like me build things. People like you just watch them crumble. Before I could speak, she turned to her guard. Make sure he's off the property by dusk. Then she snapped a photo of my license plate and got back in her SUV. The taillights glowed red as she drove away. And for the first time in my life, I felt something deeper than anger. Humiliation. I stood there until the sun started to drop behind the hills. The gate closed slowly, the golden leaves catching the last light. It looked beautiful, expensive, and completely wrong. When I finally got back in my truck, my hands were shaking. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Don't let them take what's ours. I didn't know how yet, but I wasn't leaving this fight. Not this time. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in a cheap roadside motel surrounded by coffee cups and scattered papers, the deed, the tax receipts, the letter Grandpa left me. The words burned in my head like a warning. Don't let them take what's ours. Every April I'd paid those taxes. Every single one. The county records, the receipts, everything matched. So how the hell could they call my land abandoned? By 3 a.m., I made a decision. I wasn't just going to fight, I was going to win. The next morning, I drove back. The guard saw me coming and sighed like he'd been waiting for the annoyance to return. Sir, he started, Mrs. Whitmore doesn't take drop-ins. Then she'll take this, I said, holding up the deed folder. Before he could respond, I heard the familiar hum of tires on pavement. Same black Range Rover, same flawless paint. She rolled down her window as she approached, that same perfect smile plastered on her face. Back so soon? Cassandra Whitmore stepped out, her heels clicking on the new pavement like a clock counting down my patience. She wore a dark red scarf this time, the kind that looked imported. Even the sunlight seemed to bend politely around her. I told you yesterday, I said. This land's mine. And I told you yesterday, she replied, that you're wrong. She moved closer. So close I could smell her perfume, sharp and floral, like something expensive and toxic. You know, she said, most people in your position would take our settlement offer and move on. You could buy yourself a nice little place somewhere less exclusive. There's no settlement, I said. You built this on my grandfather's farm. Cassandra tilted her head slightly, her tone sweet but venomous. Mr. Flint, you seem like a hard-working man. Let me give you some advice. The world isn't fair. It belongs to those who can afford the lawyers. The guard chuckled softly behind her. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to respond. Enjoy your visit, she said finally, because next time you step foot on this property without permission, I'll make sure the sheriff escorts you out. She turned and snapped another picture of my truck before walking away, her red scarf flowing behind her like a victory flag. That night, I sat in my truck at the edge of town, staring at the gated lights of the vineyards. Everything about that place screamed money, the golden lamps, the black marble mailboxes, the faint sound of classical music drifting from an open window. It made my stomach turn. But I knew what Grandpa would have said. If you want to take down a castle, don't storm the gates. Find the cracks. So I did what any desperate man would do. I called a lawyer. Her name was Lydia Chen, and she didn't sound like someone who scared easily. When she picked up, her voice was calm, low, and surgical. You said they're building on your land? Yes, ma'am. Without permission. I've got the deed and proof of tax payments. Bring everything to my office tomorrow at 10, she said, and don't talk to anyone else until then. Her office was in Denver. High floors, glass walls, and the smell of old leather. She greeted me with a handshake that could have cracked walnuts. Show me what you have, she said. I spread out the papers. She looked through every page, every signature, every email receipt. Her eyes didn't miss a single detail. When she finally leaned back, her expression didn't change, but I saw the faintest glint of satisfaction. They messed up, she said quietly. What do you mean? They filed a fraudulent claim. In Colorado, adverse possession doesn't apply if the rightful owner's been paying taxes, which you have. So, technically, they built all of this on your property. My heart jumped. So we can stop them. She smiled faintly. We could, but we won't, I blinked. What? If you stop construction now, she explained, They'll declare bankruptcy and tie you up in court for years. You'll win the case, but lose your life in paperwork. But if you let them finish," she leaned forward, eyes sharp, "you'll own 90 luxury houses. And Cassandra Whitmore, she'll be finished." The words hit me like cold water. "So you're saying, let them keep building?" "Exactly. Every dollar they pour into your land becomes evidence. Let them trap themselves in their own greed." I sat there, silent. The idea sounded insane, but also brilliant. "What do I do in the meantime?" "Document everything," she said. "Photos, videos, dates, names. Don't confront them again. And whatever you do, don't post anything online. We'll file the lawsuit once they've hung themselves." She stood, extended her hand again. "Welcome to the fight, Mr. Flint. Driving home that night, I passed the farm again, or what used to be. I followed Lydia's plan like it was a survival guide. Every weekend, I parked my old Chevy pickup on the hill overlooking what used to be my grandfather's grape rose. The development stretched further each time, rooftops glistening like wet blood under the sunset, driveways lined with gold-trimmed mailboxes, and a faint hum of construction echoing through the valley. It was strange how clean greed could look from a distance. Sometimes I'd roll down the window and smell the air. The earth didn't even smell like earth anymore, just tar, concrete dust, and chlorine from the new fountains. The sounds of hammers and saws replaced the songs of crickets. I filmed everything. Dates, times, close-up shots of license plates, the company banners on the construction fences. Lydia said, "Details win wars," and I was starting to believe her. 2 weeks later, I got my first scare. A county sheriff's car pulled up behind me, lights flashing blue in the mirror. I stepped out slowly, hands visible. The deputy was young, his tone polite but uneasy. "Sir, we've received complaints that you've been harassing workers and taking photos of families." I almost laughed. "I'm standing on a public road." "Maybe so," he said, checking his tablet. "But Mrs. Whitmore has filed an official complaint." "Of course she had. She's claiming you're trespassing, stalking residents, and creating a hostile environment." He used air quotes. I handed him my folder of documents. "This is my land, Deputy. Check Boulder County Parcel 1427B. The name on record is still mine, David Flint." He looked at the papers, his face tightening as he read. Then he sighed. "Look, Mr. Flint, I don't want to get in the middle of this, but you should know the Whitmores are big donors. You'd be wise to stay low until the courts sort it out." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'll stay low, but in my mind, I swore I'd never stay quiet." The following month, I brought Lydia the footage. She watched in silence, her eyes sharp as glass. When I showed her the sheriff's visit, she smiled faintly. "They're getting nervous," she said. "That's good." "Good?" I asked. "They're slandering me." "Exactly," she replied. "Every fake complaint, every police visit, it's proof they know they're in the wrong. Keep logging it all." Then she opened her laptop and pulled up county records. "And look at this," she said, turning the screen toward me. There it was, a newly filed document. Whitmore Development, LLC. Adverse Possession Claim. March 2022. "They filed a claim saying your property was abandoned," Lydia explained. "But they skipped the legal judgment process. They went straight to construction. That's fraud." I clenched my fists. "So, they knew." "Oh, they knew," she said. "And once we prove intent, it's criminal." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "You think they'll fold before trial?" She laughed quietly. "No, Mr. Flint. People like Cassandra Whitmore don't fold. They burn." By summer, the neighborhood looked like a movie set. Perfect lawns, spotless SUVs, kids riding electric scooters under the golden streetlights. One afternoon, as I was filming from my usual spot, I noticed her, Cassandra. She stood on one of the driveways, her white sundress glowing against the red brick walls. She was talking to a real estate agent, laughing like she hadn't stolen someone's life. When her gaze finally met mine, her smile froze. She raised her phone and took another picture of my truck. I didn't move. I wanted her to see me watching. Minutes later, 2 security guards in matching gray suits started walking toward me. I started the engine and drove off slowly, never taking my eyes off that woman. That night, my inbox pinged. A legal notice from Whitmore Development. Cease and desist. Accusations of harassment, trespassing, and interference with business operations. Lydia read it, chuckled, and tossed it onto her desk. "They're making my job easier," she said. "Every threat, every lie, it's evidence. We'll file once they move in the first residence." And they did. By November, the first families arrived. U-Hauls, moving trucks, balloons tied to mailboxes. Watching them unload furniture where our barn once stood made my stomach twist. These weren't villains. They were just people chasing the American dream, and they didn't know they were living on stolen ground. I thought about knocking on their doors, telling them the truth, but Lydia's warning echoed in my mind. Surprise is worth more than gold. So I waited, but Cassandra didn't. She escalated. The first false report came 2 days before Thanksgiving, a county inspector claiming there were illegal waste piles on my parcel. Then came another complaint. Unsafe structures, environmental hazards, each one tied back to her company. I met the inspector myself, a man named Rick. He walked the edge of the property, shaking his head. "There's nothing here," he muttered. "I've seen this before, developers filing fake complaints to get people fined." "Can you prove that?" I asked. He handed me his card. "Off the record, Whitmore's pulled this stunt on 3 other projects. If you need a statement, I'll back you up." For the first time in months, I smiled. "I'll take you up on that." That night, I drove past the gates again. The sky was burning orange, reflecting off the glass windows of those fake mansions. I stopped the truck, turned off the headlights, and just sat there. Somewhere beyond the walls, Cassandra was probably sipping wine in one of those golden-lit rooms, surrounded by the same kind of people who'd never lost anything in their lives. I whispered into the dark, "Enjoy it while it lasts." Because she didn't know it yet. But every step she took on my land was one closer to her fall, and soon I'd make sure the entire world watched her crash. They didn't just build on my land. They began to take over my life. It started small. An anonymous comment here, a suspicious car near my son's workplace there. But it didn't stay small for long. Cassandra's people were methodical. When they decided to crush someone, they did it like a professional. And I was the target. One Sunday morning, my daughter Emma called me. Her voice sounded strange, quiet, tight. "Dad, there's a post about you on the community page," she said. "It's gone viral. People are calling you a stalker. Someone photoshopped you next to a kid at the park." My stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my throat. "Who posted it?" "There's a name, Ridgeline Watch, but it's full of Whitmore's supporters. They have thousands of followers now. People are commenting crazy stuff." I told myself not to panic. Lydia had warned me. They'd try to discredit me. But when I opened the page, the smell of rot hit me through the screen. There I was, my truck parked on the public road, my face looking like I hadn't slept in days, with a caption that read, "This man is harassing our families. Protect your children." People had circled my license plate and left threats in the comments. "That's defamation," Lydia said when I called. "Screenshot everything. Save every share, every comment. We'll add it to the complaint." But screenshots didn't stop the damage. My boss at the engineering firm called the next morning. His voice was polite, but there was a tremor of worry I'd never heard from him before. "Dave, a potential client, found that post. They're worried about optics. We're putting you on administrative leave until this clears." Administrative leave. Translation: go home and don't show up. Emma cried when I told her. "Dad, people are talking. Mom's getting messages. Tyler got asked about you at work." My son's manager had pulled him aside after a suited man, someone from Apex Investigations apparently, asked about our family. "They're digging," Emma whispered. "They're trying to ruin us. They did more than dig. They planted." A man in a crisp suit walked into my son's restaurant and asked questions about me. My temper, whether I'd ever been violent, who I used to date. He left a card, Apex Investigations. Thomas Brennan, P.I. Tyler showed me the card, hands shaking. He asked if you'd ever been in trouble. He asked about the divorce. "Dad, people are staring at me at work." I felt the floor tilt. "Tell them to stop talking to anyone," I said. "Tell your manager to give you a letter saying you were interviewed, not fired." Tyler swallowed. "I'm scared, Dad." "Me too," I admitted. "But we fight." The harassment turned physical one night when someone sprayed the word pervert across my garage door. The paint was red and furious by morning light. I filed a police report, but the officer's questions felt routine, like paperwork being ticked off a list. He said they'd increase patrols, take prints, but he also said quietly, "You should consider staying somewhere else for a while. Stay somewhere else." As if I could be displaced from my own life because someone with money wanted me gone. Then came the phone calls, threatening voicemails, blocked numbers. One message said, cold and composed, "Drop the suit or we make sure nobody hires you again." Another said, "We can make your children's lives difficult. Think about what's important." I thought about Grandpa's ledger, those tobacco-stained pages listing timber sales and fence repairs, laid out on my kitchen table. Each entry was a line in a life. Those pages were my armor, but armor doesn't stop words from sinking in. Lydia moved fast. She subpoenaed the social media platform for IP addresses tied to the smear posts. She filed emergency motions. She called the local paper and prepared a press release telling the truth, how a development had been built on property with clear title. "We expose motive and method," she said. "They smear you because they're scared." The local reporter, Patricia Hughes from Channel 9, smelled like coffee and righteous anger the day she came to my house. "They went after your kids?" she asked without preamble. Patricia had a reputation for taking on corrupt developers. "When she came at you, she meant business." "They're trying to break us," I told her, voice rough. "But we're not going anywhere." Her camera crew filmed the spray-painted garage. She did two things that mattered. She put a name to the smear, Whitmore Development, and she promised to run the story. "If they've got dirt, we'll find cleaner dirt," she said. The story ran on prime time. It didn't undo the social media posts, but it changed the narrative for a lot of people. Viewers watched a tired man with creased hands and a stack of tax receipts tell a simple truth. This was my land. Calls came in. Sympathetic homeowners, an old neighbor who remembered my grandfather's horses, a contractor who admitted he'd been paid off during a past Whitmore project. For a while, I thought the tide might turn. Instead, the hits kept coming. The Whitmore camp escalated. There was a new man in a suit who kept appearing at local hearings, Preston Whitmore, Cassandra's husband. He wore a face that looked like it had been bought for him by a tailor. No lines, no worry. He started making donations to civic causes, showing up on camera to talk about community investment. He denied everything when asked, calm and smooth. But his name began to show up in filings, donations, payments, and, eventually, a string of small lawsuits from people who'd been swallowed by some of his earlier projects. They hired more PIs. They ceded anonymous tips to the county, complaints about my property being a hazard, about illegal dumping. Code enforcement showed up, took photos, and issued notices that needed immediate attention. Each notice had a deadline, a penalty, a fine. It wasn't about justice. It was about creating paper trails that would make me look guilty of neglect. The most dangerous part was how the fear started to spread in my own life. The engineering firm's management committee emailed colleagues about conflict of interest. Friends started replying to messages more slowly. Even my ex-wife called, voice polite but clipped, asking if I was sure I wanted to fight. One night, Lydia called me with a new piece of evidence. "We served Apex Investigations with a subpoena," she said. "They're refusing to hand over client records. That tells me one thing. They're protecting someone who paid them to dig dirt. That someone is Whitmore. Can we prove it?" I asked. We can, she said. But it will get uglier first. They'll panic. Desperate people make mistakes. And they did. A week later, the IRS sent me a letter, an audit notice claiming discrepancies in my tax returns. I nearly threw up. I had simple returns, W-2 income, nothing fancy. When I called the number listed, it was a deadline. Lydia said it was a classic intimidation move. File a claim that drags you into red tape. We'll subpoena the origin of that audit request, she said. If it came from Whitmore, that's another felony. The night before the big deposition, someone broke into my house. They didn't take anything. They left a single sheet of paper on the kitchen table with 5 words in block letters. Drop it, or lose everything. My hands trembled as I called the detective. He looked at the note, then at me. We'll process it. But, Mr. Flint, this is harassment, not proof of who did it. I looked at the handwriting. It was careful, printed, not angry. Not a drunk scrawl. Professional. My family was terrified. Emma wanted to move to her aunt's house in another town. Tyler kept his phone on 24/7. I caught him once, staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning. A tray of dishes untouched in the sink. He whispered, "Dad, what if they come after us harder? What do you say when someone asks you to give up your life? You tell them you won't." I told them stories about Grandpa, about how he fixed the fence with his bare hands, how he welcomed neighbors with hot coffee. Those stories steadied us. But every day, Cassandra's people found a new way to make life worse. Fake complaints, anonymous tips, baited employees, bought witnesses. It felt like being sanded down into nothingness. And yet, through all the noise, Lydia kept saying the same thing. They're showing their hand. Their panic is evidence. The night before Preston Whitmore's deposition, I lay awake thinking of all the things I'd lost already. My job, my peace, the simple comforts of anonymity. I thought of my grandfather's ledger again, its pages full of small, stubborn proofs of a life lived honestly. I thought of the families in the new houses, of Sarah and her 2 kids who'd called me crying, and of the countless tiny injustices Cassandra shrugged off over a glass of Chardonnay. I whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow we expose them." But even as I said it, the house around me felt too quiet, like a lull before something big and terrible. I didn't know then how dangerous expos could be. I didn't know how many lives would be tossed into the wind. I only knew one thing. They had started a war they couldn't finish without burning themselves. What happened next shocked me completely. The morning of the deposition felt colder than usual, though the sun was shining through the Denver skyline like it was mocking me. My hands were trembling so badly I had to set my coffee down before spilling it. Lydia met me in the lobby of the glass tower where the depositions were held. She was calm as always, hair pulled back, eyes sharp, voice low. "You ready to watch a man choke on his own lies?" she asked. I nodded, though my stomach felt like lead. "Let's bury them." The conference room looked like it was built for power. Polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rockies, soft hum of white noise from the vents. The air smelled of money and nerves. Preston Whitmore sat across from me, his suit so perfectly tailored it could have been stitched onto his skin. He didn't look at me once. Beside him sat his attorney, Diane Kelso. Sleek, composed, the kind of woman who probably billed $800 an hour to tell people how to lie beautifully. The court reporter adjusted her stenograph machine, her fingers hovering like a pianist's. Lydia sat to my right, flipping through her notes like she already knew the ending. "Let's begin," she said. The reporter swore Preston in, and Lydia started soft. "Please state your name for the record." "Preston Edward Whitmore," he said, his voice controlled, rehearsed. "Occupation: real estate developer. Managing partner at Ridgeline Capital. And Ridgeline Capital provided financing for the vineyards at Lakehurst Project, correct?" Yes, his tone didn't waver. He'd done this before. But Lydia wasn't like other lawyers. She didn't argue. She cornered. "Mr. Whitmore," she said smoothly, sliding a page across the table. "Do you recognize this email?" He glanced at it, then back at his lawyer. "I do." And did you write it? Yes. Please read the highlighted portion out loud. He cleared his throat, reluctant. The Flint parcel is not abandoned. Owner has been paying property taxes continuously since 2019. Adverse possession claim won't hold up in court. Lydia leaned forward. So, you knew this property was not legally yours? Preston hesitated. Our title attorney advised that the claim— Which title attorney? Lydia interrupted, voice sharp. Rocky Mountain Title Group. Lydia made a note. And they advised you it was effectively abandoned, despite knowing taxes were current. Preston shifted in his chair. They said the owner hadn't been on the land. That's not what the law says, Lydia replied calmly. You knew the taxes were paid, and you still moved forward with sales and construction. Is that correct? His lawyer jumped in. Objection. Argumentative. Overruled, the court reporter said automatically. Even she was watching now. Preston's jaw twitched. We proceeded under the assumption the claim would hold. Under the assumption, Lydia repeated. Meaning you gambled that no one would notice before you sold everything? His silence was deafening. Lydia didn't even look up from her notes. No further questions, she said finally and leaned back. Preston stood abruptly, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His lawyer whispered something, but he shook his head, stormed out. Diane Kelso stayed behind. She looked at Lydia, a flicker of something like respect or fear in her eyes. My client is willing to discuss settlement terms. Lydia smiled, small and sharp. 10 million. Plus, he resigns from every board, dissolves Ridgeline Capital, and personally covers the cost to transfer ownership of all homes to the residents. Diane laughed once, bitter. He'll never agree to that. Then I'll see him at trial, Lydia said, gathering her papers. And I'll bring Channel 9 with me. Outside, the sunlight felt different, cleaner, sharper. I took a deep breath that didn't taste like defeat for the first time in months. Did we just win? I asked. Lydia smirked. We won the prelude. Now we light the fire. 2 days later, the fire started itself. I was frying eggs when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I ignored it. Then my son Tyler called, his voice shaking. Dad, that guy, the investigator, he came back. The one from Apex. He talked to my manager again. Asked if you've ever been arrested. I slammed my hand on the counter. Did he say who he was working for? Same guy, Whitmore, Tyler whispered. Dad, they're trying to get me fired. I hung up and called Lydia immediately. She didn't even sound surprised. They're crossing into witness intimidation, she said. Send me every detail. This time, we're filing for criminal charges. But the Whitmores weren't done. A week later, a brown envelope arrived from the IRS. Notice of audit. It claimed irregularities in my last 3 years of tax returns. I laughed out loud, bitter and hollow. They're weaponizing the government now, I muttered. Lydia's voice on the phone was steady as steel. That's harassment. We'll trace the complaint's origin. I guarantee it came from one of their shell companies. Then came the headline that changed everything. A real estate blog leaked the home sale contracts for the vineyards. Every buyer, every price. The title read, Luxury Developer Sold Homes on Stolen Land. The internet exploded. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, homeowners, strangers. One woman, her voice trembling, said, Mr. Flint, my husband and I just bought a house there. We put all our savings into it. What happens to us? I swallowed hard. You're victims, too, I said quietly. You didn't know. But if you win, she asked, do we lose our home? Her voice cracked on the word home, and it broke something inside me. No, I said. You'll keep it. I'll make sure of it. After that call, I realized the fight wasn't just mine anymore. 96 families lived on that land. People who'd been fooled, just like me. Cassandra had stolen my grandfather's legacy, but she'd also stolen theirs. And now she'd have to face all of us. Lydia called that night, her voice low with excitement. The title company flipped. What? Rocky Mountain Title, they're cooperating. Preston paid them $45,000 under the table to rush the permits. They've got receipts, emails, and recorded calls. I grinned. So we have them. Oh, we more than have them, she said. We own them. Her tone softened slightly. But be careful, David. They know the walls are closing in. That makes them dangerous. I looked out my window at the empty road, moonlight spilling across the dust. Somewhere out there, Cassandra and Preston were probably plotting their next move, some last desperate play to save themselves. Let them come, I said. They built their empire on my land. I'll burn it down brick by brick. The day Channel 9 called for my on-camera interview, I almost said no, but Patricia Hughes wouldn't take silence for an answer. People need to see your face, she said. They need to know what corruption looks like. So I let her film in my kitchen. She asked questions with the calm ferocity of someone who'd smelled a cover-up. When the lights were on and the camera rolled, I said the words that had been trapped in my chest since day one. I'm not fighting for money. I'm fighting because they thought no one would stop them. My grandfather worked this soil for 50 years. They paved it over and called it progress. But progress built on lies is still rot. Patricia turned off the camera, eyes gleaming. That's going to air, and when it does, Cassandra's going to lose her mind. I smiled for the first time in months. Good, I want her watching when it all falls apart. The segment aired 2 nights later, right before the trial. It was called The Man Who Fought the Developers. They showed aerial footage of the luxury homes glistening under sunset light, then a close-up of my weathered hands holding Grandpa's deed. They played Preston's leaked email, his words echoing like a confession. The Flint parcel is not abandoned. When the story ended, my phone lit up with messages. Old friends, neighbors, even strangers from other states. One text from my boss simply said, "You've got your job back. We're proud of you." But another message came from a blocked number. 5 words. "You just made a mistake." Lydia called moments later. "Don't go anywhere alone," she said. They're cornered animals now. And she was right, because 3 days later, I came home to find my front door cracked open. Inside, on my kitchen table, sat a single sheet of paper, typed, centered, clean. Last warning. That was the night I stopped sleeping altogether. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. They sent warnings, threats, and empty bravado. I sent receipts, timestamps, and a quiet stubbornness that felt more dangerous than any furious outburst. By the time we walked into the courtroom for the final hearing, it felt less like a trial and more like a long, slow unmasking. Courtroom 3C smelled like polished wood and old paper. People filled the benches. Neighbors, reporters, the families from the vineyards, and a small army of lawyers in dark suits that made them look like chess pieces waiting for a move. Emma squeezed my hand in the gallery, silent, steady, the way a daughter can be when she knows the gravity of what you're about to do. Tyler stood beside her, eyes rimmed red but set. Lydia gave me a tiny nod that said, "This is it. Breathe." Judge Ramirez read the docket and then looked straight at the defendants, Cassandra and Preston Whitmore, who sat like statues across the aisle. Cassandra's face had the same practiced neutrality, but I could see the trembling in her fingers. Preston kept his jaw clenched. Brian Keir and Diane Kelso sat with folded arms, suddenly not so sure of their swagger. Lydia rose first. She didn't ask the judge for pity. She brought out the ledger, Grandpa's tobacco-stained pages bound in cracked leather, and she put them on the table where everyone could see. She played the recorded call from Rocky Mountain Title where a clerk admitted the payoff Preston made to rush the permits. She walked the courtroom through the February 18th email like a surgeon showing the incision. "Your Honor," Lydia said, voice controlled but sharp, "this is not a property dispute between neighbors. This is calculated fraud. These defendants knowingly sold homes they did not have title to. They bribed officials, they filed false reports, they hired investigators to harass witnesses, and they attempted to silence this plaintiff with intimidation. We seek full title restoration, treble damages, and criminal referral." The judge read the exhibits like a person reading a ship manifest, item by item, disaster by disaster. Then she asked the question that mattered. "Do the defendants wish to respond?" Preston's attorney spoke first, fumbling with the stack of papers. "Your Honor, my client acted in good faith relying on title counsel." Lydia shook her head. "Good faith requires reasonable investigation. Not payoffs. Not forged documents. Not sales contracts drawn while knowing the claimant paid taxes year after year." When Lydia called witnesses, they came forward one by one. The title company clerk who'd recorded the bribe, Rick Polson from Code Enforcement who testified about the pattern of false complaints, Deputy Torres who admitted pressure from donors, and finally, terrifying and raw, Preston's former partner who sobbed as he described how they'd cut corners and lied to investors. At one point, Cassandra stood to speak. Her voice, when it came, sounded thin. "I believed the acquisition was valid," she said, and the lie hung there like condensation on a cold glass. "We were building homes. People moved in. I never wanted to hurt anyone." Her hands trembled. Someone in the gallery started to cry softly. Lydia watched her for a beat, then asked, quiet as a guillotine, "Did you authorize the payments to Rocky Mountain Title to push permits faster?" Cassandra's eyes flicked to Preston, then back to Lydia. She mouthed something like, "I didn't know." The judge didn't buy it. Around mid-afternoon, the judge dropped the nail in the coffin. She read a section of an internal email chain where Preston joked about making Flint settle cheap or get buried in paperwork. The room exhaled. Diane Kelso had nothing left to do but fold her hands and stare at the table. When the ruling came the next morning, it was every spoiled god's worst nightmare. The court awarded me title to the entire 47 acres, including the 96 completed houses. It awarded me damages, treble damages for fraud and punitive damages for the harassment, and it ordered the Whitmores and Ridgeline Capital to pay Lydia's fees. The judge also referred the case to federal prosecutors for criminal investigation into bribery, wire fraud, and racketeering. For the first time in months, a heavy, cleansing quiet fell over me. I felt weightless and exhausted all at once. But the ruling didn't solve everything. 96 families still worried about losing their homes. That night, 100 messages flooded my phone. Words of thanks, anger, fear. "Do we get to keep our houses?" Sarah Chen asked before I could even catch my breath. I could have done what many told me was the law's obvious move. Repossess and sell. Take the money, walk away. The math worked in a cold, efficient way. The thought glittered for a second. Money for every worry I'd suffered for Emma's tuition for Tyler's future. But the ledger on my kitchen table wasn't just numbers. It was a life built on work, welcome, and the sort of stubborn decency that hurts when you try to profit from it. So I called a town meeting for March 15th. We packed the unfinished clubhouse, warm lights swinging, dust motes in the air, the bright fake flowers Cassandra had planted still trembling in their vases. I stood in front of 96 faces, many red-eyed and tired, and I spoke plainly. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "You were sold a dream built on a lie. I could make a lot of things happen legally. I could sell these houses and walk away. But that would make me what she was, someone who profits from other people's pain." Sarah reached out and grabbed my sleeve. "What are you going to do, David?" I told them what I'd decided. We formed the Ridgeline Community Trust that night. The trust would transfer title of each house to its current occupants at the original sale price. No interest. No extra fees. If a family still owed a mortgage, the trust would step into the lender's place at zero interest until the loan was retired. We would convert a portion of the damages into a maintenance fund, pay property taxes, and set aside seed money for the William Flint Scholarship, $10,000 a year for a local student who wanted to study forestry, agriculture, or engineering. Lydia handled the legal scaffolding. The accountants handled the numbers, and the community, relieved, incredulous, grateful, handled the rest. There were ugly costs. Ridgeline Capital dissolved. Preston was indicted on federal charges and eventually pled guilty to wire fraud and bribery. He forfeited several properties, including an Aspen vacation home that went to auction. Cassandra took a plea that left her with probation, heavy restitution, and a lifetime ban from real estate development in the state. Rocky Mountain Title lost its license. Brian Keir resigned in disgrace. The whirring machine they'd built collapsed in on itself. After the dust settled, life grew quieter in ways that felt honest. I kept 5 acres at the north end, an old stand of pines Grandpa refused to cut down. I built a small cabin there, 2 rooms and a kitchen, simple and stubborn. Emma stayed, helping to manage the Trust's scholarship and community programs. Tyler runs weekend workshops teaching young people about the land, how to plant grapes, mend fences, and read soil like a book. We planted a tiny orchard by the cabin, dark pink blossoms in spring, sky blue mason jars for canning on the table, and late summer grapes that would make Grandpa grin from wherever he was. Sometimes, when the sunset paints the fields in the kind of bright, ridiculous colors you only see on the best days, hot pink clouds, deep orange that burns like a promise, I walk the edge of the property and look back at what used to be the vineyards. The homes still stand, children still ride scooters down the cul-de-sacs, and in the windows you can see bits of everyday life. A mother juggling homework and bedtime, an old man reading on his porch, a teenage couple painting a room that will one day be a nursery. Those images are worth more than the ledger's money. People ask me often how I kept going, how I stayed sane while they smeared me, intimidated my kids, and tried to bury me in bills. I tell them the same thing I told the town meeting. You keep receipts. You keep friends. You keep your dignity. And when the time comes, you make the system do what it's supposed to do. Hold the powerful accountable. Was it easy? Not for a second. There were nights I thought about quitting. Nights I imagined walking away to a place with no memory of litigation and no name to drag through the mud. But then I'd see a child running through the orchard, see Tyler's hands dirt-stained and steady, hear Emma laugh across the kitchen like a bell, and the thought of leaving evaporated. The last twist came months later. A lawyer representing an insurance consortium called with a settlement offer, an amount that would have made every problem vanish and given me enough to retire comfortably. I listened, thanked him, and asked one question. What happens to the trust? His voice stuttered. We'll fund it, he said, unsure. I'm not asking for the money, I told him. I'll take what's necessary to keep the scholarship and the maintenance fund solvent. Everything else goes to the community. He paused. You're turning down millions. I'm taking back what was ours and giving it back, I said. That's the point. On the fridge, next to a child's crayon drawing of a house with a stick figure labeled Mr. David, there's a magnet shaped like Colorado. When I stand in the kitchen in the early light, I still sometimes hear Grandpa's voice in my head, croaking, certain. Don't let the bastards take what's yours. He was right, but maybe not in the way I thought when I was younger. It wasn't just about property. It was about the way you respond when someone tries to erase the life someone else built. It was about choosing what to keep. Honor, community, the stubborn practice of doing right even when the easy route is to keep your mouth shut and your bank account fat.